Dr. Kelly Brogan, welcome to the podcast. It's such a thrill to have you here today.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure.
I wanted to center our conversation today around sitting with and moving through difficult emotions. And I thought with that, to parse that with a conversation or a discussion around depression, which is very prevalent in modern society. And of course, the conventional antidote to that with that being antidepressants.
Yes.
And the reason why I wanted to do this with you is I just have one too many friends or family members who are on antidepressants who unequivocally say that this has been the game changer for them. You know, without the intervention, that they wouldn't be able to function. It's given them, they've been able to function as a member of society. And I am often, when I hear that, in my head, like, Estima, zip the lip. Like, don't talk about the PubMed literature. Don't talk about exercise. Don't talk about meditate. Like, just zip. They haven't asked you, shut it. So I wanted to talk to you because you are, a psychiatrist. You are an expert in this realm. And I thought it might be a good place to start with the hypothesis around depression, the monoamine hypothesis around this chemical, it's really a theory around the chemical imbalances in the brain. Can you explain what that is and how it is so pervasive and how we think about mental illness?
Yeah, so the sordid history of psychiatry's clamoring to be accepted and acknowledged as a valid medical discipline is probably more elaborate than we can get into now. But suffice it to say that, in around the 1950s, there were a number of factors that sort of came together to give birth to this theory. One of them was observations around the way that patients behaved after they were treated for tuberculosis with medications that impacted, at least theoretically, what's called the monoamine pathway in the brain. And there was an observation that there was like transient euphoria in these individuals. And that plus theoretical paper by a gentleman named Schildkraut, plus minus some potential CIA co-opted research on psychedelics, gave birth to this opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry to leverage a really poorly baked biological concept and physiological mechanism around what might be driving different states of behavior, mood, and cognition, but in this case, specifically depression. And, what follows is the multi-billion-dollar industry of antidepressant drugs. And what happens is that in many cases, pharmaceutical science reverse engineers a theory, right? So it would be like, as my colleague David Healy says when he uses the metaphor around alcohol as, another representation of a consciousness-altering substance, right? So if we were to do a trial of 2 shots of vodka for social anxiety, and we would have the participants take either that or water, you could imagine that in an 8-week trial there would be an effect, so that the participants might come out of that trial and say, it really helped. I actually felt way calmer, and I didn't struggle with the social anxiety that cripples me every single day. But of course, we know logically that it would be an error to deduce from that those individuals have some sort of an alcohol imbalance or some sort of an ethanol deficiency, right? And we certainly know that if they were to repeatedly expose themselves to that kind of an intervention, that biochemically they'd be in a bit of a tough place if they wanted to discontinue said intervention a couple of decades later, right? So there have been many renegade psychiatrists before me, like Peter Bregan and Joanna Moncrief, who have been shouting from the rooftops about the fact that we can not call these medications by their mechanism, right? So the suggestion that this is an antidepressant in any way, that it is resolving a baseline known state of imbalance, is a fallacy. We can, alternatively, make the argument that there is a drug-based effect. Okay, so not unlike alcohol, right?
Yes.
There's a drug-based effect. Now that effect may be very adaptive for you, right? So if you start Paxil and it's sedative and you've been wired for, 6 months, that may be exactly what you need. Or you have some of the stimulating effects of something like, Effexor or Prozac, that may be a perfect fit for you. What they have in common seemingly is a certain kind of blunting, right? Affective blunting, a kind of emotional blunting. And for many, to your original question, who do not have, I would argue this is all of us, but the experience to know how to sit with certain emotional states and to work with certain kinds of symptoms that are emerging, that could be highly preferable, right? So no one is suggesting that there isn't an effect. What many before me and what I've kind of collected data to support is that this effect is not resolving a problem. It's creating a new normal.
Yes.
And if you happen to like that, that would be great if there weren't public health, in my opinion, public health consequences to the freedom to choose this medical intervention. And one of the, while I am a huge believer in informed consent, and I would like to empower all people to make the best choice for them. And if you know the literature that suggests that the effect of antidepressants when you control for the side effects, right? And all of the beliefs that are enacted because of our direct-to-consumer advertising culture, where we've been literally brainwashed to understand our own biology through big corporations who stand to profit from that understanding, right? So when we engage a medication we imagine might help us and we start to have side effects, something happens that's called the active placebo effect. This has been exquisitely researched by Irving Kirsch, who is arguably the placebo effect expert. And what he has suggested through very rigorous statistical analysis, including the invocation of unpublished literature conveniently tucked in the file drawer, right, that he accessed through the FOIA process, he found that 88% of what we are calling the effectiveness of medication is actually reduplicated by placebo. So what that means is that 12% of people are getting a benefit that they couldn't otherwise get from placebo, and all 88% are getting only risk, right? So this is something to consider, because we might say, okay, so what are the risks? What's the big deal? Who cares whether it's placebo or not? If it helps, it helps, right? It's a pragmatist perspective, but the risks that I have come upon, the two, this is not the laundry list of like, interference with libido and menstrual cycles and GI bleeding and hair loss and rashes and all of that. The two that I want to shine a spotlight on, because I know too many people who wish that they knew about these before they, waltz their first prescription to CVS. One is the propensity for these medications to seemingly randomly, although it's just that we don't know how yet to properly risk stratify yet, induce states of impulsive violence, right? Yes. So whether this is a school shooting, or whether it's a pilot taking down an airplane, or whether it's hanging yourself from the rafters in your garage when you've never felt a moment of suicidality before you started taking that medication. The trouble is that you just don't know if you are going to be one of those people. And I have many citizen activists who have contacted me over the years, including David Carmichael, who had the experience of murdering his own 11-year-old son on a routine dose of Paxil for work-related stress. And he's not alone. This is not random. It's not rare even. So that Russian roulette is a pretty big one, right? Because in the state of intoxication, essentially, you actually can appear completely calm and normal to those around you. And meanwhile, you're in this agitated, impulsive state of akathisia, often what's called is a neurological term for the kind of state that can be induced. We think it has to do with the way certain people metabolize these medications that can lead to this intoxication state. Yes. But trust me, your primary care doctor is not screening you for those liver-based polymorphisms, right? So that's one. And the other is the potential for these medications to, I would say it's more than a potential, it's a likelihood for these medications to induce a state of chemical dependency. Mm-hmm. This is not to speak to the psychospiritual dependency that emerges from an experience of understanding yourself as fundamentally sick and broken, and understanding your emotional states as wrong, right? That is a whole nother topic. This is literally just biochemical, right? And these medications, I've made the statement many times, I still stand by it. For 10 years, I have had a practice devoted to taking women off of these medications. And I believe that they are the most habit-forming chemicals on the planet that make cigarettes and OxyContin and crack cocaine and alcohol look like a walk in the park to detox from, right? So I have never heard of a chemical that requires sometimes 1,000th of a milligram decrement per month in order to medically stably withdraw from. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of people on the internet right now telling their tales. And if that is a risk worth taking, at least you should know about the possibility, because the many, many, many patients that I started on medication in my tenure as a conventional prescribing psychiatrist, I never told a single one of them about this because I didn't know. So the odds are that your prescribing doctor has no idea, because this is something that has been discovered ad hoc, meaning like after it's out in the community, right? And now, just in the past, I would say 2 years, maybe 3, there is an acknowledgement in the published literature that this is a phenomenon, right? It's not what it has been referred to, which is often a discontinuation syndrome, right? This is withdrawal. This is frank chemical withdrawal. And nobody knows how to manage it, right? I have a lot of experience with it. And I'll tell you that it takes a lot of my own, psycho-emotional strength to sit in these spaces with people, because it can be extremely harrowing. And I know that there is a light on the other side of it that is more, incredible and brilliant than I could have ever conceived possible, when my agenda initially was just to help women not have to fill a prescription anymore, right? And so then I saw one after another, these processes of soul awakening, of recollecting parts of themselves that were kind of left by the side of the road. And that's really what coincided with my own, process of awakening and coming to a deeper understanding around the mask that I too was wearing for the greater part of my adult life. And so that's why I think I have a bit of a sense of the anatomy of this reclamation process. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That was a beautiful answer. No, you just knocked that out of the park. And what I love about your philosophy, and I'm saying this with a little bit of tongue in cheek, but I remember I was sitting down, I went out for dinner with one of my mentors and his wife, who are both, he's a chiropractor by trade. And we were making, of course, we always get onto the allopathic model and how we, the problems with it. And he said something very similar to what you just did. You really have to understand who you're speaking to and what their philosophical paradigm is before you accept their advice. Like if you go to a conventional medical doctor, they might say, well, the problem with your depression is because you don't have enough Prozac in your bloodstream. Like that's the issue. Or if you go to a surgeon, they're going to say, well, the problem that you're having is you have too many organs in your body. It's kind of that, it to the extreme. It's a little silly, but when you take a more holistic approach and you just get down to just some of the foundational basics, which I know you talk about in both A Mind of Your Own and Own Your Mind, those 2 books that you have. We're talking about, you really do embody in some ways, just in preparation for this interview, I was like, this is my sister from another mister, because your philosophy is so similar to mine. We look at the physical stressors, acute and chronic, chemical stressors, acute and chronic, and you use psycho-spiritual, I use emotional, very similar, nomenclature to depict, unresolved emotions, whether it's from your past or right now that you have not been able to sit with. And yes, sorry.
No, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And sometimes, and this is sort of a societal comment, but sometimes depression is an appropriate response to your internal and extra. Like sometimes it's just your thyroid.
I would say it's
whacked,
always an appropriate response.
Yeah.
I've really come through, studying I call them the psychiatric pretenders. So studying and observing the various physiological imbalances that can masquerade as psychiatric, whether it's blood sugar or thyroid, autoimmunity, or a medication-based adverse effect like a birth control or a cholesterol-based medication or acid blocker or an antibiotic, or whether it's a sensitivity to gluten or dairy.
Yes.
Whether it's a micronutrient deficiency, right? So whether it's those physiologic elements or whether it's a patterned response that has been learned and enculturated by your family of origin, whether it's a sensitivity, right, to all that is in fact misaligned, with the way that we are inhabiting this planet right now. So, in all of those cases, to feel anything ranging from anxious agitation to a deep sense of your soul saying no, right? Which is an opting out. It is no, I will not punch the clock like everything is fine. It's not, right? So how does your body manifest that? Through excessive fatigue, poor concentration, inability to rest or sleep, loss of appetite, right? A feeling of hopelessness. And so I often invoke the Krishnamurti quote that says, it's no sign of health to be well adapted to a profoundly sick society, right? So could it be that those of us like you and I, right, who seem to fit pretty well our square pegs into the square hole that society expects us to, that we actually have a less sensitivity and a deeper catacomb of the kinds of shadow elements that we don't have intimacy with, meaning that there are whole parts of Kelly Brogan, right, that I never knew were actually a part of me, right? And so what I did for the greater part of my adult life is project those parts that I judged and rejected onto other people, including the pharmaceutical industry, right? And I lived in a state of warfare, war with myself, constantly in conflict with others, and in these meta activist related conflict with the world, right? And I thought, well, I'm going to win eventually, right? But the truth is that it wasn't until I was able to develop a modicum of intimacy with those, disavowed parts that I came to find actually everything is kind of unfolding the way it's meant to. And now I can respond from wise mind, right? Now I can respond from a place that isn't, my child self driving the car. But there are many, many people who don't fit their square peg well into the square hole. Maybe they have a circular peg, right? And it just doesn't fit. So they don't get jobs easily. They're not productive members of society, right? This is a major argument for the economic concept of a universal basic income, right? Is it the case that just because we don't value art, right, in the conventional sort of application of it, or just because we don't value teaching, or we don't value performance that isn't on a Broadway stage or whatever, that we don't value certain soul-based expressions economically and capitalistically, that those people should struggle to survive? Well, that's what we've set up, that we only value this and we don't value that. And so those people are maligned and judged, and honestly are invariably labeled as mentally ill. Yes. They get caught in the cogs of the wheel every time. And so that's why I've often said, that it's the most sensitive people. I'm not one of these people. I'm on a spectrum, but I'm certainly not as sensitive as the women I've treated, for example. It is the most sensitive people whose sensitivity expresses itself through symptoms as a means for the soul to get the attention of the mind. And those symptoms are labeled pathological. Those people are medicated, and they are stuck in an arrested state of ownership over their vital force energy, right? And that's why in the process of reclaiming themselves from conventional psychiatric treatment, I have watched people blossom. Many of them work for me now, right? I've watched people blossom into these powerhouses, like radiant as hell, and just like ready to give their gift to the world. And often I'm told that the only thing I provided them is permission to trust that actually nothing is wrong with them. That makes sense to me. That resonates, because, the rest of my protocol is essentially a ritual. It's a ritual that works. And we've published, in the peer-reviewed literature, our outcomes, many of which are, medical history making. I know it works, but why does it work, right? I would argue that the greater part of why this, 30-day protocol is effective is simply because it is a ritual for self-control and self-ownership and self-possession, right? And now, the grooves of that ritual are wearing, with thousands of people having done it, wearing very deep, and the field is strong, holding that space for anybody who wants to step into it, right? And so it becomes, I think, even stronger over time until maybe it won't work anymore, right? I think that's what happened also with antidepressants and pharmaceuticals in general, right? That the belief around them became so strong that you could just fill the prescription, pick it up from CVS, and already begin to feel better, right? But now we're getting to a point where actually the belief is faltering, right? We're starting to feel the bankruptcy of that system. And so the effects are going to be less and less and less. And because they're less and less and less, they become less and less and less, right? Collectively and individually. So I actually think we're in an incredible moment of powerful transition into a really unknown territory.
It's almost like an initiation process,
That's
right?
right.
Like when we talk about this 30-day protocol, and you can outline it if you'd like, and I would love for you to do that so the listeners can learn about it and seek you out online. But I think there's something to be said about doing difficult things and doing it in a community where someone can witness you and someone can see the struggle and to see you persist through that struggle. Can you speak to that? Does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. I think the concept of initiation came to me when I began to see the anatomy of the dark night of the soul, right? When I began to see that the disruption of the business as usual, like I'm going to stay with the devil I know kind of thinking, gave birth to ultimately this sense that I heard over and over and over again, that these individuals finally feel like themselves. And I remember like the 20th time that I heard that, that's so weird. Why am I hearing that phrase over and over again? Like people weren't saying like, oh, I feel so strong and sexy and beautiful and, and my energy is great. That was the phrase. I finally feel like myself. And so what I found is that this process somehow alchemically provides the ingredients for contact with your essential self, right? So these days, I know that Kelly Brogan, the mother, the one who hated cats 6 months ago and now has a kitty I'm going obsessed with, the one who used to live in New York, now she lives in Miami, the one who loves to dance and the one who went to this school. And that's a persona I'm relating to every day. And I hope to infuse that persona with the highest degree of integrity and consciousness possible. However, there is a me that I've always been. I've always been it. And depending on your belief system, I may always be. It may even be an eternal me. And this me doesn't have a past, it doesn't have a future. It only has the eternal moment, right? It only has the now. And this me is always okay, no matter what, is undisturbed under every and any circumstances, including trauma, including violence, including hysteria, that me is okay, right? And so how can I make contact with that me beneath all the masks, right? And this protocol has the capacity to drop a big mask. However, there are many, many more, beneath it, right? I'm still taking them off all the time.
We're like onions. We're like onions.
Like onions, exactly. And I probably will until, the day I die, when hopefully I can recapture before then, a moment of childlike innocence, where I finally just be present to my lived reality. But the protocol is very basic. So it's a nutrition protocol that is not by any means as challenging or rigorous as other effective protocols like, GAPS diet or FODMAP diet, autoimmune paleo, etc. It's based on a template that I used as a former ethical vegetarian, although I was eating, Cheetos and Pepsi and pizza. I went from that to eating a fair amount of animal foods, including red meat, in an effort to resolve my Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I was diagnosed with postpartum 11 years ago. And I have adapted this protocol under the mentorship of Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who helped me to understand where it fits in a spectrum of different diets, right? So it's just one option. However, it happens to be a really good starting template for anyone who's struggling with depression or fatigue, multiple chemical sensitivities, allergies, thyroid autoimmunity, and it is it's an ancestral diet. So it's basically eating animal foods of all varieties, vegetables and fruits of all varieties, nuts and seeds, but it's eliminating grains, it's eliminating legumes and dairy, and also, of course, processed sugar. And then when I practiced in New York, the hardest part was no alcohol and no coffee. So
Yes.
just
Yes.
filtered water.
Yeah.
That's when I lost a lot of people. But so it's that, and then it's engaging the stress response with a daily contemplative practice. I'm trained as a Kundalini yogi, and I also happen to feel like 3 minutes, which is all that I ask for, of Kundalini meditation relative to mindfulness meditation or something else, really gives you an experience, right? So because there's a lot of breathing and mudras and sometimes mantras, it's a very active kind of meditating. And for somebody who otherwise has difficulty meditating, it's a great place to start. I did that for many years before. Just this last week, I went on my first silent retreat, right? And that kind of meditating, where there's no instruction, you just sit and be still and quiet, to me is extremely advanced. I needed a good 10 years under my belt of other forms of meditating to even be able to sit with that possibility. So it's that. And then there's also detox, right? So in my approach, I have learned about the power of the coffee enema from Nick Gonzalez to stimulate liver-based detox, which is very important for anyone taking medications, but arguably for all of us, I do them regularly. Conscious consumerism, of course, you know about all of this, what kinds of products can we purchase, this one versus that one, to lessen the body burden of toxicant exposure, and then, filtering our water, filtering our air, buying the right mattress, that kind of stuff. So it's really just meant to be a month of an uncomfortable amount of attention paid to yourself, hopefully through a reverent lens, right? So how would you treat the baby that you've been wanting, for 10 years, and you finally conceived and you finally birthed and that baby's here? How would you treat that baby, right? You would make sure that every aspect of her experience was carefully considered. And that's something of what we're going for. And it's very neurologically disruptive to that default network, right? To that autopilot that we get into, which is meant to serve us, right? So that we don't have to think about so many things and we can navigate other challenges that might present themselves, right? But if we can disrupt that, then the whole central nervous system is in a state of plasticity, I believe, is in a state of receptivity to laying down new tracks. And that's the only way I can explain what comes of this protocol, because as you heard, it's not that complicated. However, the community, in my opinion, is extremely unique, because I don't know another, psychiatrist out there who has the particular extreme beliefs that I do around the capacity to heal, and there never being a situation where medication is necessary. That doesn't mean you can't choose it or you won't choose it. But that's the conclusion I've come to, is that we actually can grow our own capacity to create the container around that wild swirl within us of energy. And we can learn to hold it through the cultivation of a certain kind of adult. We call it an adult consciousness, but it's that you that I mentioned, right? It is that watching eye that knows that everything is fine, right? And if you're getting caught up in the energies of your body and mind, then it really serves you to remain connected to that stable ground of being, right? And so that's a learned skill for sure, but it doesn't take that long for it to come online. And in my estimation, it can take as little as a month. Now, this is something I'm still working on all day, every day. So it's a practice. But I do have faith that everyone has this inbuilt capacity to reclaim themselves.
What's nice about that 30-day protocol is that at the end of it, as you're saying, you have so much more information. You understand how you respond to casein or wheat or red meat or all these things, and that can drive future decisions, but you can never actually change your behavior if you don't actually go through it. And I think, and I hold this philosophy that you are never really given anything that you can't handle.
I agree with that.
You can, if you, and I say this with a loving, firm hand for any, and we know that just statistically, the listeners who are listening to this episode today, we know that they are either on an antidepressant themselves or there's someone in their immediate circle that they know is on an antidepressant. And you are never given anything that you cannot handle yourself. And you had mentioned something I wanted to touch on, which is the inner child. I think you called it your child self.
Yeah.
And we are so scared of that ugly, unworthy, unlovable, lazy,
Exactly.
troll,
Yeah.
that we think essentially lives inside us, that we just, and the antidepressant is another proxy to just push that down and ignore that. But that is how, through your protocol and some of the other things that you're talking about, that is how you that is how you come into your whole self, the full acceptance of who you are. What is your inner, you can either talk about this personally or in a clinical setting in terms of case studies that you've seen. Do you do a lot of inner child work in terms of, like, I name mine's baby Steffi, like baby Steffi is, scared of being left, abandoned, and she feels ugly and unworthy. Those are her sort of things that she swirls in.
Yeah.
But if you don't allow yourself to marinate in that, then you will always, the fear around those things becoming true are the things that drive your behavior rather than that, like, me and baby Steffi are going to walk through this together.
That's right. And what I love about the zeitgeist that we're in is that, 10 years ago, I'm not sure many people would have had any idea what you just said.
Right. I
And
know.
now, the kind of,
myself included, I would have not
exactly
talked
right.
to myself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is an awareness of something called a reparenting movement, right? So what does that mean? That means that we have the opportunity, even though our culture did not set up the conditions as indigenous cultures do for adolescents to initiate into adulthood by encountering the limits of the fear that the ego expresses, like, I can't do this, right? They encounter that and they blow through it, and then they become the bigger adult consciousness that has that ground of equanimity, right? We don't have the conditions set up. So we're just like kids running around in adult clothing, all of us, from political figures on down to your neighbor, all of us. And I think we are amazingly at a point in time where we are discovering, okay, initiation requires my moving into the dark cave, right?
Yeah.
I've got to go. Only I can do it. I can know other people are doing it. I can be a part of communities that are doing it. But in the end, it's an inside job I have to do. And there is this elusive quality I have been, observing for many years that I can't really understand, which is readiness, right? So you reference the people listening who are, maybe they've considered antidepressants, maybe they're on them, maybe they know somebody who is, maybe they know they would never touch that. But then a moment comes where they're like, oh, should I do it? I don't know, right? So the readiness is the best I've come to in terms of kind of capturing it, is that it's a moment where moving towards change, radical change, actually feels like a relief, right? Because the moment before, staying with the old familiar, even though you complain about it 24 hours a day and you're deep in your victim story, staying in that is still preferable, right?
Yeah.
So the initiation process involves moving into that cavernous place where we have stuffed our child self, right? And so the child self, I think of as being the experiencer of emotions, right? Arguably, again, depending on your belief system, I believe we incarnated to feel emotions. Literally, that's why we're here. That's why. to feel emotions, right?
Love that.
And to re-experience love from the seeming duality of non-love emotions, right? Whether it's anger or shame or rage or fear, we could understand each of these strong negative emotions is actually being a flavor of love, right? Being a voice that says, I don't deserve love, or love's not here, or I don't love that. Or, those are the voices of those negative emotions, but they're all relative to love, right? So if we think of what's actually the opposite of love, it's probably disconnection, right? And that's probably why states of disconnection are the most existentially anguish producing, right? But these other states are still very alive, right? And when we can potentially grow the container strong enough to just know that they have an arc, right? They come, they flare, and then they go. Their energy, right? The only way to really do that is for there to be that adult consciousness in the room, right? So that adult woman who's saying, baby Steffi, it's okay to feel ashamed. It's just okay. We don't have to fix it. In fact, we're not going to fix it. We're just going to sit here and feel it. And you're not going to die. I promise you. I promise you, you're not going to die. Right. So I go through that kind of a micro exercise, that I put my version of it in the book. It's just a visualization very related to what you described. I don't know, probably 5 times a day, right? Anytime I feel any disturbance, and that can be from a communication. It can be from a feeling like I don't have time, to do something I need to do. It can be because I'm, cooking and my daughter's like, mama, whatever, where she's like in my right hip for some weird reason. So I sort of like imagine my posture turning down towards that part of my body. And I just hold her. Like I feel like I hold her and I say, it's okay. Right. Because if we don't do that, that's where the shadow comes in. If we resist those emotions, we don't allow them expression. The shadow is where they get stored, right? And distorted. And that's when we end up projecting all of these rejected traits onto others. And I believe, generate the conditions for us to experience these emotions again and again and again, right? So have you ever had a girlfriend who attracts the same kind of guy and is left, at the altar or whatever, over and over and over again, right? Is just her bad luck? Or is there some element of her subconscious, her shadow, that is attracting these experiences so that she can finally give herself the authority and permission to simply feel them and for that to be okay, right? Because she didn't get that permission at any other point in her life. And now the poetry is only she can give it to herself, right? So there's no partner who can do this work for you, right? And I'll take the opportunity to say that it's actually romantic partnership that probably gives you the most opportunity to work with this. I don't think I would have any idea, what this work was if it wasn't for my romantic partnership, where all of this stuff comes up and all I ever feel when we're in conflict is like, wah, it's not fair. Like I'm right. It's the child self has a child voice. And the trouble is that then as a grown woman, I'm translating for her. I'm letting her drive the car instead of taking the wheel, turning back to her in the car seat and saying, it's okay. I know where I'm going. I know you're upset. We'll be there soon. That kind of a thing. And it's the hardest work. It's the hardest work. I almost left my husband in the recent past because I couldn't imagine feeling the feelings that he is perfectly designed to induce in me. That's why I know I love him, right? Yeah. I just didn't want to feel the feelings. Literally, the story becomes irrelevant because the truth is that I just didn't want to feel the feelings. And once I got to a point where I could relax into seeing that if I don't learn to feel these feelings with him, I'm going to have to do it with the next guy. Right. And that I'd rather do it with him. So how about I woman up, right? And I really break this cycle that has probably been handed down to me from, 8 generations of women. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your honesty with that. I agree that your romantic partnership, the other area is parenting.
Parenting.
Your children will just hold and mirror back to you all the things that you truly need to heal within yourself. And we had Dr. Shafali
Yes.
Sabari who I know on the podcast, and she said something almost identical to what you just expressed, in that we are all just 8-year-olds in adult bodies. And when she talks about having parenting issues, or when a parent comes and says, my child is just not doing the things I want them to, she's like, okay, we're not going to see the kid yet. We're actually going to talk to you first.
That's right.
And just a little clinical pearl, one of my patterns that I've noticed with women where they would come to see me clinically, it's either neck or hip. Always the neck and hip. So when we think about that, energetically blocked in the throat chakra, blocked in the sacral or the root chakra, and the physical pain was often, again, an invitation to uncover more. The way that it was trying to escape the body was through those two distinct areas, and is often emotional stuff there as well.
Oh, 100%. I've had both of those.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to tell you I'm such a fan of your work, and just thank you for your contribution. It is no small feat to fly in the face of the consensus and to have the courage to follow your own path and to bring that into your teachings. And when I look at you, I said, you're my sister from another, when I watch you, in many ways, you give me permission to follow my own path and to be more of who I already am, but to peel off more of those onion layers in my own journey and in my quest to help other people. So,
well, likewise, because I'm not everyone's cup of tea, that's for sure. And so for me to dialogue with such a like mind is really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will put in the show notes where people can find you, but the Vital Mind Project and the Vital Mind Reset are the two programs that people, if they would like to engage with you, is that?
So we have Vital Mind Reset, which is the protocol. So that's kind of like the deep dive, like when you're ready. But then we have a membership community that's just kind of where we hang out. And we do kind of like life hacks every month for a week. And that's called Vital Life Project. And so that's my newest project. So I guess about a year old or so now. It's pretty amazing. It's actually impacted my life more than I ever expected. Just that spiral process of revisiting the readiness over and over again. Like, am I ready to drink more water? Nope, not yet. Am I ready to, limit my cell phone use? Maybe, so we kind of address these one thing at a time.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly Brogan. It has been such a pleasure for me.
Thank you.